We have here Craig Smith from Marriott and Landon Loomis from Boeing. And also we have virtually Margaret Myers from the Inter-American Dialogue. She's going to join us. Hi, Margaret. How are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Let me start with you, Craig. Talking about the economy and the recovery, there is an incredible sector which is tourism, where you see a lot of what happened during the pandemic, right? What are your thoughts here? What is the recovery? How is the recovery going?
So us, the airlines and the cruise ships, we dipped we lost 90% of our sales at one point. It was a miserable time period. And today, it's hard to wipe the smile off my face. Life is good. It's coming back. It's coming back faster than we've ever seen. When we see a recovery, it's just the curve's almost straight up. And so it's a good time. It started with leisure travel. It bled into this thing called leisure travel, where people would stay for 2 days of work and finish with 2 days of vacation on the back end. And now we're seeing corporate travel back, group travel coming back also.
Do you have any numbers, any figures?
I can tell you trends.
Oh, trends, yes.
And I think probably the main point is that when we take the friction out of travel, things happen. So our business in, let's take Europe, for example, London, or UK and Europe, is when business came back, it came back slowly, but as soon as they got rid of the last health requirements, it came back with a wham. And so I think just today what we're seeing are numbers where we're 40, 50% above the booking pace above pre-pandemic. And so it's coming back very fast. And then we have areas that we didn't lose, that we had no restrictions during COVID. Take the Maldives or Cancun, they had banner years. They did better than they've ever done.
Landon, obviously Boeing is linked to this. How are things for you, especially for the MAX series? Yeah. How is that recovery going?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember kind of where we were in March of 2020 to even begin to answer the question of where we are today. In March of 2020, total passenger traffic in the world was down 95% globally. That's never happened. If you ever had an issue before, it was kind of localized in a specific region. And as an industry, you could kind of compensate, where in one region it would be affected, in another it would be rebounding. Not the case, obviously, with COVID. So from that negative point, what we've seen is that the effects on our region here in Latin America were particularly strong. They were, obviously the region was very affected. And in fact, if you look at the total number of air passenger seat availability, the total capacity of aviation traffic that went into bankruptcy, the highest percentage of any region was here in Latin America, higher than Africa, higher than Southeast Asia. And that's because, as we saw in other presentations, the economic impact in terms of GDP here in the region was very strong, and that was coupled with lack of support from government. That combination put a lot of the companies, across the region into bankruptcy, and that was a key issue that defined the early stages of COVID. Where we are today is actually in a much better spot. I think as a result of the flexibility that bankruptcy allowed, the result of a lot of changes that the airlines made, that companies like Boeing helped them through the transition to accelerate the adoption of more efficient aircraft, for example, the MAX, which you asked about, has positioned them to grow. And what we see going forward, Boeing does our current market outlook, and we look out to 2040. The estimated market for Latin America is $535 billion between now and 2040. So this is a huge market. And the key driver of the growth for that market in our sector is about the regional interconnectivity. So the single largest component of growth that we expect to see that drives passenger traffic is going to be the way to which South America connects with itself. That's, I think, an exciting trend for all of us to consider and explore, and I think will have impacts on other industries as well.
That's where Miami and also Panama dominate, by both of them kind of being hubs for Latin America.
Right? Margaret, you're an expert on China and LATAM relations. We heard in the first panel a lot of different views about how Latin America should integrate and negotiate itself with the rest of the world. I want to hear your thoughts on what is the moment now for the Chinese-LATAM relations?
This is a really fascinating moment for China-Latin America relations. I like to say that China-Latin America relations are evolving in three very specific ways. One is we're seeing a sort of tapering of overall economic engagement. That doesn't mean China's leaving by any means, but a tapering in the overall numbers. Trade continues to grow and to underpin the relationship as it has for a couple of decades now, but we've seen a sort of drop off in certain types of investment, especially greenfield projects, over the past few years, and also specifically and rather remarkably in the area of sovereign lending, where we really don't see very much activity at all. We'll see something of an uptick probably in 2022, but I've seen no lending whatsoever for the past 2 years in Latin America. So a real sort of, I would say, tapering again. And then accompanying that is something of a focusing of overall activity. And so there, we see a focus on what China tends to call new infrastructure. And those are sectors, industries that are related largely to innovation and high tech. And indeed, anyone in Latin America now knows that China has developed a really extensive presence in these areas, in wide-ranging sectors across the region, whether we're talking about, just selling Lenovo computers or delivering smart grids and smart cities, safe cities technologies, other AI-based technologies, cloud computing, really, you name it. And these are indeed the areas where China is focusing very specifically at present in order to be able to address some of its own concerns at home about its ability to grow well into the future. And then a third area is localization. And I think maybe this is to be expected, but we're seeing not just engagement at the national level, right, bilateral level, which was a feature of the relationship early on, but really local engagement, whether we're talking about with states and provincial officials or at the municipal level, and not just with capital cities, but of cities of 200,000 people or less in certain cases to achieve certain objectives, most of them commercial in nature. So a real change in the way things are happening.
I want to ask Craig and Landon about the political scene, but first remember we have a poll that you can participate through our app. The question that we have on the poll today is, why has Latin America's growth lagged so far behind Southeast Asia? We have three options. You can see them on the screen: a legacy of populism and political volatility, poor infrastructure, or the high cost of capital. So if you want to use your apps, please to participate in the poll. And also, if you have questions for our panelists, we'll be happy to read them. So, great.
We have two of us on stage who lived in Asia before. So
okay, so what is the difference you see from the political approach? We see a lot of governments are like sincerely not, let's say, anti-business, or they don't love business in the region. What is your take on this? Is that a factor in your business?
Yeah, you don't have to love business, and I think back 200 years ago when I was in school, and you read Adam Smith talking about competitiveness of nations, right? What countries and governments need to know today is that they should wake up, like I do every morning, and saying, who's my competitor, and how am I going to compete? And I don't know that that's the countries that win are the ones that do that. And Southeast Asia has done a very good job saying, where are we competitive? Where can we win? And how are we going to grow that side of our business? We do the same thing as companies. Latin America needs to do the same thing. Is that where can we win? There is a trade war kind of going on between the United States and China. Those factories are going to move somewhere. They're either going to move to Southeast Asia or they're going to move to Latin America. There's a huge upside in tourism. Tourism is an export. Someone brings foreign currency to your country and they buy something here today. That's a huge opportunity, and Latin America has a competitive advantage there. The question is, are they going to take the friction out of it? And are we going to look at it as a group and individually to say, how can we win in this area? And how can we be competitive?
Amnon?
Yeah, I think that it's important that we can talk about what the impact of business is. So while there may be political opinions about business in general, I think everyone would agree that the 7.6 million jobs that the aviation sector creates are important. The $187 billion of economic activity we generate are important. And that appeals to any politician of any stripe. But not just that. You think about the surge of low-cost carriers that have come up kind of as COVID has receded. We see across the region a surge in new carriers who are coming up offering ticketing prices at a lower level. If you can change the cost of something, then you change what it means. If you can take, we've got customers in the Caribbean who are looking to cut the cost of a flight in half. If you are able to do that, then you change what it means to fly. You make it a more democratic, experience. And I think that sort of impact that businesses have by focusing on cost and efficiency, working with government partners who often have to help in that process, then what we can do is change what we are doing and even the social impacts of our enterprise.
I think we have the results of the poll already. Let's see if we can see them. There you are. Oh, what a surprise. Complete agreement, a legacy of populism and political stability. Certainly, sometimes you feel that governments want to have the cake and eat it in the region, right? Like they want to have the points that you are saying, Landon, in terms of creating jobs and investment, but at the same time, they don't want to set the rules that will allow for those jobs to happen. Right?
Can I add one thing there?
Go for it.
It's not about just creating jobs, it's about upscaling jobs. So I checked in last night to our JW Marriott here in Panama City. The general manager there, he started off in banquets. So where does that happen? And so when we're selling to governments, even if they're this quote unquote anti-business, we're saying we're creating jobs, we're upscaling the jobs. There's a lot of good that's coming about from allowing us to come and work in your country.
And just one quick comment just about comparing Latin America to Southeast Asia. So the big economies that matter in our industry, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, they have the same GDP per capita as Malaysia and Thailand, but they have half as much passenger traffic per GDP. So they have twice as much GDP as Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines, and yet they have the same amount of passenger traffic per GDP, which means that it's not just a question of GDP. We have to work on the connectivity in the region, that issue itself. And I think we see that not just in travel patterns, we see that politically, trade agreements, the sort of macro infrastructure that ties the region together is more strengthened. It's more a defining feature of Southeast Asia than it is in Latin America. And that inefficiency is a barrier that I think, if it were resolved, would generate benefits across the board.
Margaret, given this comparison between Latin America and Southeast Asia, you want to add anything from an academic perspective?
I mean, I think that bringing in the question of nearshoring is kind of interesting in this particular sense too, right? Of course, a lot of what's happening there's a lot happening, as Mauricio pointed out earlier, right? And a lot of prospect there, but a lot of it's being captured by Southeast Asia, and to a degree in Latin America, specifically by Mexico. And so, I do see this continues to be mentioned, whether in the context of the Summit of the Americas as maybe a central theme, or by, on the Hill here in the U.S., or by wide-ranging international organizations or international development banks that are committed to making this happen as a promising, potential area of focus. And yet, there is still much to be done in the Latin American region, and for many of the reasons that have already been mentioned by the panelists, to make the region attractive to these investments. And that's really all I would say about that. But might I make one quick note? I think it's worth noting, and I see this is also something of an impediment to the sort of large-scale policymaking that would be facilitating of nearshoring, addressing a lot of these inefficiencies. And perhaps it's an unfair judgment, and I leave it to my panelists to sort of refute this claim. But it's my sense, having had many conversations about this in the region, that there's an enduring belief in many places that China will be there for countries really for the duration. And a critical factor in addressing pandemic-related economic challenges. And I think that may very well be the case, right, if all goes well domestically in China. And for the time being, China would appear fully committed to advancing its position in sectors deemed of critical import to China's own growth. But of course, China's might and remarkable and sustained resilience is not always clear. Despite all of that, it's not always clear how things will develop a decade from now. And the Belt and Road itself, as we've mentioned, is already evolving in some very critical ways. So China, the U.S.-China competition is a factor shaping a lot of this. So will be China's own economic development, as we all know.
Let me ask you there, Margaret, let me ask you there in terms of nearshoring, right? Like, you feel China will be worried about this? Because we speak everywhere. That's, probably one of the number one issues, especially in Mexico. You speak to Mexican officials, they really they see this opportunity. But for China, is this really a worry, given the situation they're in with COVID and with political situation there?
it's kind of unclear how extensive this process will be at present. There are plenty of anecdotal examples that many people, point to when they want to talk about, progress already in the area of nearshoring or friendshoring, as it's been termed here in the U.S. to a degree. But there are a lot of companies, companies have different calculations, those that are based in China and doing manufacturing or selling to Chinese markets. And some of them are, far more able to and inclined to move elsewhere and to make capital investments elsewhere. Others will not, despite the challenges associated with doing business right now in China, which in many cases are mounting. So, it largely depends on who it is and just how extensive, the costs will be associated with this. So I think, as was mentioned earlier, the next, year or two will be very telling in this respect. On the other hand, you have a lot of Chinese companies, right, that are also taking advantage of this potential phenomenon. And there's been a huge uptick this year in Chinese companies heading to Mexico looking for opportunities in manufacturing and other sectors.
Craig, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'd see Mexico competing more with Indonesia and with Vietnam than with China right now. And I think that's where, as far as for manufacturing, I think for tourism, which is just as fluid, it's an open game for the world right now.
So go for it.
Yeah, I just want to highlight a couple of ways in which Latin America can contribute from a point of strength and leadership. They have a lot of resources that are useful and competitive from a global perspective, and I think there's an opportunity to lean into some of them. So, for example, Mexico graduates more engineers than Germany, a fact I learned on a recent trip. You've got great engineering expertise in Brazil, in Colombia, and elsewhere. So there are pockets of expertise which are important today, because today the market for that talent is so tight. So there you have companies with a global reach or perspective are looking everywhere for that sort of talent, and we're certainly among them. I think beyond that, you also have just the supply chain itself. We have $1 billion supply chain impact in Mexico. It's one of our top 5 suppliers in the world, and we in this environment we can continue to grow that. But beyond that, as we think about the role that e-commerce has played through the pandemic, it's transformed cargo aviation. And the demand for cargo carriers today, Boeing supplies 90% of the total cargo capacity in the world, has meant that we've had to open new cargo conversion plants. And where did we open our first one in pandemic? Here, in the region, next door in Costa Rica. And the last third point I'll say, which is a topic I think that is also important where Latin America can lead, is sustainability. So as we talk about how we're going to decarbonize aviation, the most important, there's a multi-pronged approach. We have to do all of it. The biggest, most important element of that approach is sustainable aviation fuels. And the question is, where does the feedstock come from to ramp up production of that fuel? Latin America is privileged in its, kind of materia prima, in its raw materials that could feed into that solution. So whether you're talking about supply chain manufacturing, engineering, sustainability, there are important stories to develop here that really aren't about China, they're about Latin America.
So you see an opportunity there because Boeing has a massive research center in Brazil, you have all these suppliers in Mexico. Is it real nearshoring for you guys in Mexico, for instance?
It's just good supply chain global presence building, right? So nearshoring it's closer to the United States, but it's really actually about taking seriously the opportunity to develop a value proposition that exists in Brazil, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, here in Panama. These relationships, these are smaller countries, but the contribution they can make isn't just about serving the domestic market. They can become an effective part of a global approach and a global strategy. And so I think that's the lesson that we've learned through the pandemic, through the disruptions to the supply chain, is you have to have a resilient global approach to not just to where you're going to sell your products, but how you're going to build your capability.
Craig, you mentioned that obviously Latin America has a great opportunity in tourism. It's a competitive advantage. I'm based in Mexico City. It's incredible, the boom of tourism that you see, not only on the coast, obviously, Cancun and all these places, but also in Mexico City, in Condesa, in Roma, in all these places. But what are you doing about it? What are you guys investing in?
We're building. Where are you building? We're building all along. So you take what started as Cancun became the Riviera Maya. What started as Puerto Vallarta became the Riviera Nayarit. The whole both coasts are going up and down. We met with governor of Puebla. Not Puebla, with Oaxaca. They're building roads now. There's more going on there. There's a lot going on in this area. And so cities, the same thing, our cities. And so our expansion in Latin America, we have 300 hotels in Latin America. We have 100 signed contracts that are under development. and we've got more coming that we'll be signing this year. And so we're really bullish about the region as far as travel goes. And think also the fact that you've got a very young demographic, right? So the one thing that China doesn't have is this, and India has, and Latin America has, is this growing young population. That young population, they're tech savvy, they want to grow, they want to move, they're not happy just to stay in one place. It's going to be a game changer if we're talking about the long run.
So 300, another 100 coming?
300.
300?
300.
Plus another 100 coming?
At least.
At least. So in 3-4 years, would you say how many properties?
Well, our goal obviously is to beat the more than double in 3 to 4 years.
Okay.
And you know, pre-pandemic, tour and travel, and this is a great thing for both of us, was beating GDP in almost every single country. We're seeing it coming back at the same rate. So we see travel coming back quickly. I've had all sorts of experts get on TV and say, no one's going to travel, they're going to use Zoom. And I'm like, really? Are you going to use Zoom when your competitor flies across the world and sits down and meets with a client face-to-face? And this is Latin America. Where do you do work? You do work over a meal. You talk family, football, and then you talk about work. You can't do that over Zoom.
We also heard about the end of the business travel, right?
Yeah, that's not happening. I can tell you from our statistics now, not happening.
Margaret, let me go back to politics a little bit. You mentioned before the Summit of the Americas, right? And we saw, a little bit of back and forth between the White House, Mexico, Brazil. We are just a few weeks from that event, and we still don't have confirmations. How is China reacting to all of this? Are they looking at this with pleasure, maybe, Is there an opportunity for that?
It's certainly been portrayed in the international media as a boon there was a recent article, I think maybe today, that came out describing it as a boon for China, which, has held some summits in the region just very recently. There was a Caribbean summit that was evidently very successful, and then also the China CELAC Forum, which is, a regional platform of China's own design that took place this past December, and, an articulated wide-ranging new vision for the region. So when you hold those two, that in contrast with what's happening right now, with the Summit of the Americas and a sort of last-minute effort to really pull this together despite a lot of concerns about major leaders, presidents not attending, there is a sort of stark contrast that one could easily paint. I can't imagine that China is sad about how things are going at this particular juncture with the Summit of the Americas, but I'm hopeful that in these next 2 weeks, the agenda can be solidified and at least focused to identify areas of considerable concern and shared interest, right, among those who do attend.
We certainly all are. Listen, we have 3 minutes. I'm going to ask you a quick question to all of you. Craig, let me ask you about inflation. How that is a problem. We have the region with the highest inflation this year, around 15% expected. Is that a problem for businesses?
We were worried about it. It's affecting us more on building cost. Mm-hmm. We were worried about it as far as travel goes, and we haven't seen the effect yet. I mean, our rates are, because of demand, the rates have gone up, which has been positive, but it hasn't affected people traveling. It's affected building cost.
Landon, in terms of the MAX, Gold was the first company to reoperate the plane. How is it going in Latin America?
Yeah, it's going great. I mean, honestly, the story of the MAX in Latin America has been, it's just demonstrated the importance of this region to our company. ANAC was the first international regulator to unground the MAX. Gold was the first, as you said, to put it back into revenue service. Since then, at the end of 2019, we've had more than 1 million flight hours, 400,000 flights, 189 regulators around the world have all approved, to put the MAX back in the air. And honestly, to me, that is what a Boeing fix to a problem looks like. You ground an entire fleet of aircraft around the world for 2 years, and when you bring it back, the schedule reliability rate of that aircraft 1 million times is 99.4%. That's what Boeing quality looks like. And I think, honestly, as difficult as that experience was for us, this region played an important role in helping us demonstrate what it looks like when we come back.
Margaret, for you, my last question is, which would you consider the biggest success of China in the region? Where is China really influential in Latin America?
I think probably if you asked me each year, I would say something different. But this year, and last, even amid the pandemic, there has been sort of accompanying or related to this process of localization an absolute explosion of diplomatic activity across, at varied levels. And this includes, these sort of multilateral platforms that have been established. Also, extensive bilateral activity has been the case for a very long time, but really efforts to engage with and cultivate networks at the very, very localist of levels, which I think, in some cases are very targeted and intended to achieve very specific commercial objectives. In some cases are not, and are simply looking to establish these networks to the extent that they'll be productive, maybe a decade from now. And I do think that this will significantly expand China's overall presence in the region in the coming years.
Thank you so much, Margaret, Landon, Craig. Thank you. A round of applause for our panelists, please. Thank you.